You're watching another episode from The Weird and Unexplained with John. Beneath the lights of New York City, one woman claimed the impossible happened. In 1989, Linda Napolitano said she was lifted from her 12th floor apartment in the middle of Manhattan and into a blinding blue light hovering over the East River. Witnesses reported seeing the same thing, including men connected to a political motorcade that night. Was it mass hysteria, a secret government operation, or something beyond imagination? Explore one of the most chilling and controversial UFO abduction stories ever recorded, the Linda Napolitano case. From late night lights to whispered confessions, what really happened on that cold November night still divides believers and skeptics today. Manhattan after midnight. The city hums like a live wire, sleepless and electric. Below the towers of glass and steel, the East River laps against concrete wharves, and the lights of ships drag ribbons of gold across the water. For Linda Napolitano, this is home, a quiet apartment tucked high in a building on Manhattan's Lower East Side. It's the kind of place where life feels predictable: washing dishes in a small sink, the television murmuring from another room, the rhythmic sound of city life filtering through thin walls. But on the night of November 30th, 1989, that sense of normalcy would shatter, because something impossible happened, something that Linda would spend the rest of her life trying to explain. Linda couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, restless, wrapped in the cool glow of moonlight pouring through the blinds. Her husband was asleep beside her. The city outside buzzed faintly through the glass. And then, without warning, it changed. A piercing blue-white light blazed through the window, bright as a stadium spotlight, flooding every corner of the room. Linda tried to move, but she couldn't. Her muscles locked, her voice failed. Panic surged, but her body was frozen in place. In that blinding glow, she saw them, three figures, small, gray-skinned, large black eyes glistening beneath the light. Their thin bodies moved without sound, their heads tilted slightly, studying her. They didn't speak, but somehow Linda felt them inside her mind, calm, almost soothing, but absolute. They reached toward her, and suddenly she was floating. The air thickened. Her body rose weightlessly from the bed, drifting upward toward the window. She screamed, but no sound came out. She felt herself pass through solid glass, out into the freezing night air, bathed in that brilliant blue light. Below her, Manhattan sprawled, the glittering grid of orange streetlights, the dark line of the river, the sound of a distant police siren. Above her, a massive craft, suspended in silence. Inside the light, she found herself in a huge, circular room washed in blinding illumination. The air buzzed faintly, electric and sterile. The walls curved away endlessly. There was no sign of machinery, no visible seams or panels. Everything seemed to flow together, luminous and alive. The beings guided her to a table. She tried to resist, but her body obeyed them, as if under invisible control. They examined her. She remembered instruments that glowed, needles of light, cold hands that never quite touched her skin. She couldn't feel pain, but she felt intruded upon, as if they were exploring her from the inside out. One of them, taller and different from the others, moved closer. She sensed authority in its presence. Through their strange, psychic connection, she thought she heard words, though the language didn't make sense. It was more a feeling: we need you. You will remember when it's time. And then, nothing. The next moment she was back. Her body hit the bed softly, the light gone, the air still. The clock beside her read 3:15 a.m. Her husband slept soundly, unaware. Linda lay there in silence, her heart hammering, wondering if she'd dreamed it all. But deep down, she knew it was real. The days that followed were a blur. Linda felt uneasy, distracted. She tried to tell herself it was just a nightmare, but small things didn't add up. There were marks on her body, small punctures near her nose and behind her ear. And at night she kept waking at exactly 3:15, drenched in sweat. Her husband didn't believe her. Her friends laughed it off, so she stayed silent. Until 2 years later, when she decided to write to someone who might listen. That person was Bud Hopkins, one of America's most prominent UFO investigators. Hopkins had written books, appeared on talk shows, and gathered hundreds of stories that mirrored Linda's in eerie detail. When he received Linda's letter, something about it caught his attention. He said she wasn't seeking attention. She was frightened. Something had happened to her. Hopkins met with Linda in early 1991. Through multiple hypnosis sessions, Linda described every detail: the blue light, the window, the floating sensation, the examination. It wasn't unique, but it was compelling. Then a twist that changed everything. Hopkins received a letter, not from Linda, but from two men who said they'd seen something strange over the East River the same night Linda claimed her abduction occurred. They wrote anonymously, calling themselves Richard and Dan. The letter described watching a woman float from a high-rise window, bathed in a beam of bluish light, rising into a hovering craft. The men said they were on duty, escorting an important political figure, when their car suddenly stalled under the Brooklyn Bridge. When they looked up, they saw the impossible. She was in the sky, one wrote, arms outstretched, surrounded by light, and then gone. Hopkins was stunned. He contacted the men privately, and they corroborated each other's accounts. Their details matched Linda's hypnosis transcripts almost perfectly. And then came a rumor that would make the story famous. The third witness, the man they were escorting that night, supposedly a high-ranking politician, also saw the incident. Some later claimed it was a United Nations representative, even identifying him as a future Secretary General. That part of the story was never confirmed, but it elevated the case from a curiosity to a sensation. But not all the witnesses remained neutral. Over time, one of them, Dan, became obsessed with Linda. He began calling her, showing up near her apartment. He claimed he was traumatized by what he had seen, that the same beings had started visiting him. They took me too, he told Hopkins, because I saw them take her. Linda grew terrified. She refused his calls, but he persisted, sometimes leaving cryptic notes. His mental state deteriorated rapidly. Hopkins believed Dan had suffered a psychological break, perhaps triggered by the trauma of what he'd witnessed. Police intervened twice. Linda once found Dan standing across the street from her building, looking up toward her apartment. When she confronted him, he broke down crying, saying, "You were chosen, you were floating, and I couldn't stop it." Strange letters followed, typed in all caps, claiming that Linda was special, that they would come for her again. Some called it madness. Others pointed to it as further proof that something profound had happened. Bud Hopkins spent years compiling the evidence. He believed the case represented a turning point: urban abduction. Not rural, not isolated. Right in the heart of New York City, a woman was supposedly taken through her apartment window into a hovering craft, visible to multiple witnesses. Hopkins went public with the case in his book, Witnessed: The True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO Abductions. It drew international attention. The media split into skeptics versus believers. Some journalists mocked the story, calling it urban myth-making. Others pointed to the sheer number of consistencies between Linda's account and other abductee reports: the blue light, the telepathic beings, the feeling of floating paralysis. Hopkins defended Linda fiercely. He said she was a credible, stable woman with no motive for fabrication. Over the decades, she never deviated from her original story, even when it brought her ridicule. Hopkins said she never gained fame or fortune. If anything, it ruined parts of her life. Skeptical researchers had plenty to say. Psychologists argued the experience fit patterns of sleep paralysis, a natural phenomenon where a person, half awake and half asleep, experiences vivid hallucinations, often involving figures and pressure on the body. The feeling of floating or being watched can accompany it. As for the witnesses, skeptics claimed their stories were contaminated by suggestion, fueled by Hopkins's questions or the massive UFO culture of the late 80s and early 90s. They also questioned the so-called political witness. No official ever confirmed being present that night. The names remained hidden. The supposed bodyguard letters were untraceable. too many researchers. The case was an extraordinary tale built on ordinary misunderstandings. But even among skeptics, one thing lingered: the sincerity of the people involved. Hopkins believed they truly believed, and that conviction, he said, was harder to explain than the event itself. In the years that followed, Linda Napolitano lived a quiet, guarded life. She avoided interviews and rarely appeared in public. Those who did speak with her described her as calm, articulate, and unwavering. She insisted that her abduction wasn't random, that it was part of something larger. "They said I'd remember when it's time," she told Hopkins. Hopkins continued to defend her until his death in 2011, maintaining that the Napolitano case was one of the most compelling and well-documented abductions on record. Today, the building where Linda lived still stands. Residents on the 12th floor sometimes mention the story, passing it around like a local legend. Late at night, some claim to see flashes of blue light reflecting on the windows, though no one can ever say from where. A coincidence, perhaps, or maybe something more. The story of Linda Napolitano forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Are abduction accounts the product of trauma and imagination, or glimpses into something truly otherworldly? In Linda's case, every theory seems incomplete. The skeptics can't explain the witnesses. The believers can't produce proof. The truth, if there is one, hides somewhere between them, suspended like that blue light over the East River. Maybe Linda's story isn't really about aliens at all. Maybe it's about what happens when ordinary people encounter the unexplainable, and how belief, real or imagined, can reshape a life. Whether you believe her or not, one thing is certain: something happened on that cold November night in 1989. A woman awoke to an impossible light. Witnesses looked to the sky and saw something that defied reason, and a story was born, one that continues to haunt New York's skyline more than 30 years later. To this day, people still ask, what if it really happened? And when the city sleeps and the East River reflects the lights of Brooklyn back toward the towers of Manhattan, somewhere, someone is looking up, wondering if they're still watching. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next video.